So, Jim, the five most powerful laws in the world is where we left it last week. So we're going to cover
Yeah,
them
wealth
today.
creation show. Yeah,
Yeah.
five most powerful laws in the world. We're going to go through this actually, and I think it's really good, to talk about that, because there'll be similarities in what I've done and what other people have done as well, and they'll be going, yeah, I'm following that law, definitely,
Yeah.
and there'll be other ones where you're thinking, actually, I'm not following that law at all. So that then gives you the confidence to say that, okay, if I follow that law as well, then things might accelerate a lot quicker than I expect. That's the mentality of the five
Yeah.
most powerful laws in the world. I mean, there are five laws ultimately, Richard, and
Hmm.
and I'm sure some, as I said, some of you might have heard of them. It's just that you never knew that they were called the biggest laws in the world. Now, I don't
Yeah.
mean like legislation laws. What I mean by like things like the laws of attraction. Most people
Hmm.
know the laws of attraction that are successful at some point in time because they understand that. Most people know things like NLP, neuro linguistic programming. Um, and there's other things as well. I talked to somebody about this yesterday, and they started to mention about focus and core values, and I went, "Whoa, wait a minute! You're not just an artist," because it was at an artist crafts event, and I
Yeah.
went, "You're not just an artist. No one comes up with these sort of these sayings and stuff like that with it's an artist unless they've actually been involved in this in some shape or form.
Hmm.
And I think for me, this is what it is. It's these five laws, the biggest in the world. People use it and try to live by it in every phase of their life, but you probably haven't heard anyone mention them at all. You just know you use them, but you don't
Yeah.
know what they're called, if that
When
makes sense.
you mentioned this last week and says we're going to do the five most powerful laws next week, and I thought, God, what are they? And you sent me the information about what they were, and they've all got individual names, and I thought I've never heard of them. But when you actually look at what the laws, what they actually are,
Mm,
I thought, oh yeah, I know that one, and I know that one. So
definitely.
for me, like everybody else watching, it's new to me. Although obviously you're obviously already aware of what the actual names of the laws are and follow them. For me, it's kind of, oh, right, okay, that's that one then, and that's that one. So this is going to be quite a good one today.
Well, let's talk about I follow them loosely.
Yeah, yeah,
I follow them loosely. Everybody does at some shape or form at some
yeah.
point in their life, I think. Any success you've got will probably be down to these five laws. And any times you're not successful, it's probably down to the fact that you're not following any of these five laws at all.
Hmm.
So tune in and we'll talk about this. Number one. What is number one, Richard? We spoke about,
So, sorry, I'm just, we're a wee bit early today, so I was just making people aware that we've started a wee bit early. So, but yeah,
Murphy's
number one
Law.
is
Murphy's
Murphy's
Law. Where have we
Law.
heard that before?
Yeah,
Yeah, cocktail.
yeah.
When Coughlin's Law, and Murphy's Law and stuff like that. That's where it all come from. This stuff isn't made up. So what does Murphy's Law say?
Well, this is anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and I'm sure a lot of people will know, have heard that and know that. So, that's quite an interesting one. Um, and of all the eponymous laws, Murphy's Law is the one where you're most likely to have heard it, and I think a lot of people will have. And it's simply the rule that anything that will go wrong that can go wrong will go wrong.
Yeah, definitely. So this was Edward Murphy, an aerospace engineer that came up with
Hmm.
this. And the story behind the law is actually more positive than you actually think. Murphy was working as an Air Force base to develop new devices for testing human tolerance
Hmm.
of G-force. There's no surprise, Air Force Base developing new devices, aerospace and stuff like that. And several errors nearly led to someone being seriously injured. But the team had always assumed that everything could go wrong. See there?
Yeah.
So this is what I talk about play the downside. It's the same thing. Play
Hmm.
the downside. So when I go through the critical path analysis, and I also go through the plan of how everything should work. In other words, in an ideal world. So I'm starting off with the interest rate as it is just now. When I'm doing property investment, for example, I'm starting off with the interest rate as it is just now. I'm starting off with 100% occupancy rate as it is now. I'm starting off with the rental value as it should be now, the market rent. I'm starting off with overheads at a high rate. In other words, the amount of money I'm needing to reinvest into the property to keep it going and maintain the property and actually keep the tenancy going.
Yeah.
So when I do my modelling in terms of where I want to be financially when I invest in a property and what purchase price I want to do for it, it's financial modelling, it's called. Okay,
Yeah.
use it in, they use it in economic projections and stuff like that. So on a small scale, I'm doing a wee financial model for a property investment and also for a portfolio. If there's a portfolio and how much it yields and how much the interest rate is to buy it, and when you're buying it and what the overheads are and what the running costs are, and you factor all that in at the best scenario possible. And then I apply Murphy's Law.
Yeah.
What happens if the occupancy rate drops? In other words, the property isn't occupied. Now, for most people, they could run their business model like that as well. A lot of businesses run their business models like that as well. It's called sensitivity analysis and risk analysis, for another phrase. A lot of the insurance companies use this all the time. They risk analyze everything. They have certain standards that they have to meet when somebody invests, and they insure that investment and back it up. So when they invest, for example, when you come along, and we'll come back to the bit about my financial modeling and how we do it. When you come along in the insurance industry and say, look, I'm a 55-year-old man and I want critical illness cover, they go, well, you're more likely to have an illness now at 55 than you were at 35. So according to our figures, your insurance is going to be a lot higher than you were when you were 35 years old. Because the risk of you having a heart attack, for example, is probably a lot more likely, or heart disease. Did you know heart disease is the biggest killer in the world? And yet we focus on things like cancer and that.
I did actually know that. And as it's quite it's over. It's not. I wouldn't say it's overlooked, but it's not got as much
Definitely
attention.
Definitely overlooked. It's the very poor relation. And yet heart disease is the biggest killer in the world. It is not cancer or anything else. It's heart disease that's causing the problems here. That's the problem we need to solve to live a bit longer. Everything else will fall into place as a result of that. Anyway, let's come back to Murphy's Law and how it applies to me. So when I go through a financial extrapolation, in other words, I model it to see where I'm going to be. Now, by the way, I've not even bought the property to begin with. So this is just financial modeling. I then know what the market rate of rent is. I then know what the interest rate is. I then know what the overheads are. I then know what the occupancy rate is in terms of that. Then I bring the occupancy rate down and I start to work out tolerances.
Yeah.
How far does my occupancy need to drop before, and this is the key here, before everything else breaks even? So in other words, before I break even is zero at the bottom with my overheads and everything on. Now, generally, my tolerance is 6 months. In other words, half. Now, it's very rare that's ever going to happen when you buy a property. It's not going to just be occupied half of the year, because more than likely the property's ready to go, or you refurb it, it's ready to go, and somebody's going to stay in it for a lot longer than half of the year. But I bring it down to see if it actually gets down to that level. Now, sometimes I've got a wee bit of tolerance, about 9 months possibly, because I know I've got fat, built in somewhere else. And I mean like extra overheads and that built in that I could actually cut back on. So that's what I mean about trimming the fat. You don't want to cut into the bone though when you're doing things. So this is what Murphy's Law is all about. It's like anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So model for that. So how far can it go wrong? 6 months for me. And then I then put that back up to the 12-month occupancy rate and say, okay, I know interest rates are going to be fixed for me for 5 years on a 5-year deal possibly. So that's what it's going to be fixed at. But in an ideal world, if I didn't have that fixed rate, how far can I go before the overheads are covered? In other words, and then it might be the case that, well, for example, right now in my portfolio, interest rates need to go to 16% before I need to worry.
I think everybody will have to worry at that level.
Yeah. We're all going to hell in a handbasket if that's the case.
Yeah.
So therefore, I've got a huge degree of tolerance in terms of the financing as well. So I could afford for interest rates to go up and take that hit and absorb that if it needs to come to it. So I've got the interest rate covered in. And then I think to myself, okay, let's look at rent controls. If rent controls come in and Patrick Harvey gets his way, and then all of a sudden we're deemed at the fact that we're no longer getting $550 for a 2-bedroom property, if that's the case. Now, this is just examples, by the way. We're no longer getting $550. Yeah. We might end up getting $450. But how far can I go low in the rent before it actually breaks even? And breaks even means you've got enough money to cover your overheads. So how far can that go? And then often it's like, I can get a 3-bedroom house and then actually get a 1-bedroom rent out of it still. So I've got a huge degree of tolerance in the terms of the rent level as well. I can actually bring that down. Hence the reason why I give some people a lower rent to help them out, because I can absorb it. So then I put that back up to where it should be in the market rate. And then I work on, okay, in an ideal world, if anything does happen and these all collide together at the same time, if I need to cut back on overheads, 30% overheads of the top line rent I've got in all the time. So if I've got 30% in, and 30% is things like management fee, it's insurance, it's repairs and renewals. If I cut back on the repairs or the overheads, which I can, because I could, in an ideal situation, I wouldn't want to self-manage, but you would self-manage because that is the biggest cost to you. Or because you don't really want to cut back on the refurbishments. So self-manage. If I cut back on that, it cuts to 15% instead of 30%. Okay. So then can I have a lot more tolerance everywhere else? And the answer to that is yes. Then I work out, okay, if that's the case in all that model, that then tells me I'm pointing to the bit of my spreadsheet. That tells me my spreadsheet what the purchase price for that type of rent should be, matches up with. And that's what I'm doing in terms of financial modelling and buy-to-let investment. I'm applying Murphy's Law every single time. We talked about this in forecasting for the business when I came back to you and said, let's look at the next 6 months, because we forecast at the beginning of the year, this is the targets we want to hit.
Yeah.
Are we going to hit them? And then we go to the 6 months and we'll go, okay, are we going to hit them, or are we going to exceed them, or we're maybe going to be a bit more challenged because the economy is a wee bit different? And if that's the case, where are we now? So then you presented your information for the lettings division. Perry presented her information for the sales division. I then put it into a financial model, and then I modelled that again and then worked out where I am. Budgeting and forecast. Now, this is not new. This is what happens in the city. So when I used to work with PLCs, when we were involved in limited companies and reporting to PLCs, Beaufort PLC was a classic example at the time. When I was in VZS Technical Ceramics as the financial controller, we had to report to Beaufort PLC, but we were actually helping out on the board for Beaufort as well as the management team with Edward Duke and Clive Gillum, who was the financial director and the managing director of the PLC. We actually advised them, and I sat in on that, and we made sure that we financially modelled, hence the reason why if you've got a profit warning because you've remodelled and reforecast, then you have to notify the city that there's going to be a profit issue. And it's these profit warnings that investors pick up on, and they think, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't be investing in that company anymore, or it doesn't make sense investing in that sort of level anymore. So this is the Murphy's Law thing. Now, it could all go right, but you still have to report as a PLC if it is actually going to be different than what you expected in the first place. That's why sometimes bigger companies like BP and that do quarterly, and Amazon, they do quarterly statements this time to tell the city they're on track and their investors they're on track, or they're maybe going to exceed, or they're maybe just not going to hit the level that they were supposed to. Apple comes up that as well, don't they? Now, Apple comes up, and then sometimes you see other people. Now, who was it recently? Somebody came on and actually just yesterday, on BBC News, on the news, they said they're actually going to downsize their workforce because they've now forecast and remodelled, and they realise they're not going to generate as much revenue as they thought. So now they're going to have to look at the first thing that they go for, and it's typically labour, because labour is usually the highest cost in the business. And this is what Murphy's Law is all about. It's like if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong And that's what you financially model on.
Yeah, and my question was going to be to you that obviously when you're applying Murphy's Law, when you're looking at potential buy-to-let purchases and things, and you stress test that and change certain things, whether it be interest rate or occupancy or things, and push that right to the limit. If by any chance it does get to that limit, then what do you do as your backup or your safety? But then as you're saying that as your overheads, and you would look to self-manage initially. That would be the first thing you would cut back on. And like you say, or bigger companies might look at labour, and that's how they would cut back, and that's what their backup and their safety measures would be if that scenario occurred.
Whereas a lot of buy-to-let landlords actually self-manage, they don't actually stress test to the fact that they don't put into their financial modelling that a letting agent could be doing this for them. And that's why when they get to the point where maybe something else happens in their life or something else happens in their career, and they may be given another job and they have to concentrate higher on that because they're maybe given a promotion. They've got nothing in that financial model to actually appoint a letting agent because they've no built in any cost to what they did in the first place. Therefore, they bought the house at too high a price point, and the rent isn't able to cover all these costs. Therefore, they're left having to self-manage a property. They can't self-manage anymore.
Do you know, it's quite good practice as well, because although you're saying, Jim, you've got fixed interest rates and things, but you still stress test the fact that they may be cheap, because then you're preparing for any of it.
So much experience. I've had so much experience with the banks. Never trust a bank with what they say, because the banks will say anything to sell you the product. And just like a salesman, they'll say anything to sell you the product. Once they've sold you the product, 5 years comes along, it's like, oh, it's a different situation. By that time, I've got you by the short and curlies. You're with us. You can't go anywhere else because you're locked into our system. Therefore, we're going to put the base rate up, or we're going to put the interest rate up. And it's like, you better be aware of that, and you better be able to tolerate that if that happens. Now, 99 times out of 100, it probably won't happen. But I err on the side of caution all the time.
For any eventuality. Yeah.
And that's what Murphy's Law is applicable to. That's the whole point of Murphy's Law.
Yeah, definitely an important one in any shape or form, whether you're a bigger company or whether you're just a self-managed buy-to-let landlord. It's a really good thing to have.
I would tell every single small business, every single small business owner, every single person that's got a budget for their household as well, is apply Murphy's Law. Apply Murphy's Law in the principle that I always forecast as well, and on a personal level for Elaine and I, what happens if Elaine loses her job?
Yeah.
Would we be able to survive on my income on its own? And every single time the answer to that was yes, because we always worked within my one salary. So one salary is what we lived on in the very beginning for a lot of years. And it surprises everybody, because at the time, we literally just lived on £1,000 a month. And that included our mortgage. Yeah. A lot of people didn't realize. And at that time,
Can I do that now?
I was a company director. I had a brand new Mercedes car that sat at the front. And our budget in cash every single month was £1,000 we lived on. And everything else we had went into the buy-to-let business, went into property investment, went into wealth creation for the medium to long term. We always looked at it like that. This was like planting all these seeds, like a farmer mentality. Every single seed getting planted. Each one of these pounds, each one of these pound notes getting planted, and actually encouraging them to grow into this beautiful tree that would provide huge amounts and abundance of fruit every time we came to harvest. The tree was growing, and as a result, every single year we harvest, and we'll still do that today.
Yeah.
Everything we planted in the very beginning, we harvest today still. And every single year it comes to fruition. Every single year we harvest. We did it once. We disciplined ourselves by the rules of Murphy's Law and the other laws that we're going to talk about, and we reap the harvest, and we reap the harvest every single year. So there's no surprise when I tell people that we're away to Necker Island next week. Which is Richard Branson's home.
But I mean, that's it's really good to use that example, Jim, because people might think, well, that doesn't apply to me, but everybody in their day-to-day life, and if you're applying this, what if one of you lose, and looking at a normal household, what if one of you lose your job, or what if interest rates on your mortgage go up, or what if utility bills skyrocket? Do you know what I mean? And then you would look at trimming back things like entertainment, Sky packages, things like that. They're the things you would take out.
We never
then.
had that.
Yeah, but I'm just in today's world, if
Yeah.
people were looking at it, that's how you would approach it.
But we had that option.
Yeah.
And genuinely, Richard, all we ever went for was what I called council TV,
Council TV, yeah.
which was Freeview. That was it. You had a Freeview box at the time. It was never built into a television, and you had a Freeview box, and you got that for basically you bought the box, and that was it, done. And it was free television all the time. That's all we lived by. There was no subscriptions to Amazon. There was no subscriptions to Netflix. There was no subscriptions to Disney Plus. There was no subscription to everything. I hate subscriptions because subscriptions means ongoing cost.
Yeah.
Now, I know I have to do it now for what I do in the business, and I accept it, but I don't get involved. Everybody used to come round and be like, oh, have my photocopier. It'll save you loads of time. And I like what time will it save that a LaserJet or an inkjet printer can't do? Because I'm not doing huge volumes of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And you're hiring me a printer and you're costing me every single month. And I've got to pay for that every single month for the next 3 or 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
No way am I taking that into the books on the cost of my business. And that's how I run the businesses.
Yeah.
And that's not my business personally, but the businesses in manufacturing, and I was a financial controller and financial director for. These were all the things that were really important, and that's the Murphy's Law was the typical one. What about the next? What's the next one then?
So the next one is Kydland's Law. So Kydland's Law is if you write it down clearly, then it's half solved. Now, I could relate to this because there's a lot of times where, I mean, you come up in challenges, whether it's work and life and things. See, if you write something down, it just becomes a lot more clearer in your mind. And I feel like you are able to solve something a lot easier once you've kind of processed it and written it down. It's like learning as well. If you write something down and say it out loud, you learn it quicker. So I could relate to this one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, there's a slight variation just for me personally.
Okay.
I think if you've got a problem you need to solve, write it down, okay, what the problem is, clearly define it. You'll not be able to solve it there and then because that's why you're writing it down. So it gets out of your head, it gets onto paper. And then, I know somebody that used to have a wee box, just a wee jewellery box, and it sat on his desk. And he used to write it down, and he used to put it in the box, and he used to close the lid. And after a couple of days, he would open the box, he would look at the question again, and he'd go, I've got the answer.
Yeah.
And it's because his unconscious mind actually went to work on the problem without him actually knowing. And by putting it in the box, he was more or less physically compartmentalizing the problem rather than keeping it in his head, which clouded his judgment for everything else that was going on in his day-to-day life. And that's how he did it. So for me personally, that's what I do now, but the box is in my head. It's like if I've got a problem and somebody says, oh, we've got this and we've got that, we need to deal with this and need to deal with that. I go, yeah, okay, leave it with me. And then I'll put a reminder in my diary in a couple of days' time, or I'll put a task to do. And then in a couple of days' time, I'll come back and the reminder will say to me, so-and-so, so-and-so. And it's like, now I know what the answer is. It's like, or you've probably come across that yourself.
Well, I don't know if this is maybe the same, but I tend to WhatsApp myself messages and I email myself, or I'll write an email and I'll leave it in my drafts or something, and I'll go back to it.
Yeah. Kydland's Law.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that is not new to anybody in terms of what it is, but it's attributed to different people. And the slight variations of Charles Kettering, head of innovation at General Motors, spoke of the problem and well stated being half solved, every single time when he did that. Albert Einstein is quoted as having to said that if he only had an hour to save the world, he'd spend 55 minutes defining what the problem is and only 5 minutes solving it.
That's strange to think it like that. But and if you think of Albert Einstein's train of thought as like that, then that's quite interesting.
Too many people jump in feet first. Into every single problem and think they're going to solve it right away. But what they don't realise is if it's not absolutely urgent at this point in time, you need to take some time out and think about it and define the actual problem. Because often what you're defining or what you think the problem is isn't the real problem. Keith Gilbert Keith Chesterton, is credited with having said that it isn't that they can't see the solution, it's they can't actually see the problem.
Yeah.
See what I mean? It's like,
It's like
we
the
can
wood for
agree.
the trees thing.
Yeah, we can agree to defining the problem as well is essential to enable to solve the correct issue, and therefore having a positive impact on the solution pursued. So let me give you an example of the problem. The problem is a lack of affordable, okay? Well, the problem is house prices are going higher and higher, and most people can't afford them. Well, most people in general, run of the mill, can't afford them. You know, man on the street can't afford these high prices. Right
Yeah.
now, whether they can afford it or not is, and the political debate about they should be able to afford it and all the rest of it is another question. But the problem is, some people can't afford these big houses or the houses that they need. So the houses that they need, not the houses they want, the houses that they need for their circumstances. So that is the problem. The rental market, for example. So the private renting sector is overheated right now. So that is the problem. And rents, apparently, supposedly, according to the media and according to Patrick Harvey, are out of control, which is the Minister for Tenants. So what is the real problem? And what is the real answer to that? Now, think about this. Their answer is, I tell you what, we'll put rent controls on the private sector and we'll stop landlords selling their houses so we can keep them for people to stay in. Now, do you think that's really the problem properly defined and the solution properly delivered?
No, and obviously,
So what is the real problem?
Well, for me, property is scarce, and housing is scarce. So
yeah. So how do you then make it so property and housing isn't scarce?
Build more.
How do you make it affordable?
Well, how do you make it affordable then?
You build more houses, more
Well, that's
affordable
what
housing.
But if there's more houses, then the cost for them
You
is going to
build
be less.
more affordable housing. If you build more houses, if you're on an island and you've got 10 houses and you've got 100 people for 10 houses, if you build 90 other houses, then everybody's got a house.
Yeah.
What do you think that does to the price of every house then?
The price will come down, obviously. Yeah.
It stabilizes the price to where it should be naturally, based on the incomes of the 100 people on the island. Because therefore you'll have 10 of these properties sitting empty out of the 90, out of the 100, because the other 10 can't afford to buy them. So they'll have to come down to a level where these people can buy them, because so the problem is not the private renting sector and the fact that house prices are going out of control. The problem is supply.
Yeah, there's not there. That's definitely
The real problem is supply. The real problem is not a private rented sector crisis. The real problem is a social rented sector crisis, because there's not enough social rented houses, because they sold them all off in the 1980s. 70% of the stock disappeared. Now home ownership, and that's quite right, because these people need them because they're now in there, or they would be empty. So these people have them now, but they didn't replace these. Therefore, the new generation coming along who can't afford that because of their income levels, therefore don't have access to any affordable or social housing. So in order to stabilize the market and sort it in the long run, the key is to build social housing and also affordable housing, and put a lot more supply into the market, therefore stabilizing prices and probably bringing them right down. Now, Japan is a classic example of that. Japan house prices were 6 times more in the early 2000s than they are right now. Why is that? Because the population declined. Therefore, there was more houses available. Therefore, there's less people to buy them. Therefore, the house prices come down because there's an oversupply. See how that solves a house price issue? See that how that solves a rental issue? If you've got more properties for rent, it stands to reason there's more for people to choose from. Therefore, the rents will be more affordable because they'll automatically come down. Supply and demand economics. So Kydland's law is, if you write the matter down clearly, that's a half solved. And clearly the matter isn't the private rented sector, or it isn't property prices. It's a crisis in the amount of affordable homes and social housing being built. That's the problem.
Could I say something, obviously, on topic? So if we're thinking about, take the Scottish Government and thinking about housing, and if we're talking about Kidland's Law, surely, this is going to sound really obvious, if they were to sit down and look at this, put it down on paper in front of them, what the problem is, which is we've got a lack of supply of housing, increase in costs, then surely they would deduce that the issue is we need more housing. We need to build more housing, affordable housing, social housing.
Richard, they probably know that already, but
Well,
they
yeah.
can't
This
even
is what I
build
mean,
the
they need
social
to know
housing.
that.
They can't even build the social housing they're committed to already because we've not got the skills and we've not got the resources to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That is the problem. That is the defined problem. We don't have the skills. We don't have the necessary people to do it as well. And we don't have the financial impact as well. They don't have any of these resources. So what do they do? Plus the fact this is short-term thinking. This is
Mm-hmm.
how can we get political points? Remember, the ultimate result of a politician is to be defeated. Because that's the only way they'll stop being a politician. So ultimately, they want to stay in power all the time. So everything they want to do has to be designed to appeal to the masses who vote for them.
Mm-hmm.
So the mob rules. Whereas you can see right now, I'm not being political here when I say about Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy Hunt stands up and goes, no, fiscal duty. This is what we need to do. This is how we need to get back on track. This is how we need to be in the medium to long term. Now, whether that's right or wrong is a different story. That's not what we're talking about here. But the fact is, he goes against the grain because he realizes it's not about popularity here. It's about saving the economy and saving Britain PLC. That's how he looks at it. Totally different way. Now, in my opinion, that might be possibly the right way because inflation's starting to come down. Interest rates are going to be coming down as well. Employment's still at a record level. So only time will tell. In 5 years' time, we can look back at this and think, well, what actually happened?
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to do that. So that is what Kidland's Law is all about. Writing the matter down and clearly defining it in order to solve the real problem and the real issue.
Yeah.
Number 3. What's number 3 then?
So the next one's interesting. Number 3 is Gilbert's Law. And Gilbert's Law is the biggest problem in the world is no one tells you how to do it.
Okay. Well, for this law, I'm not going to explain this or tell you the story behind it. You really have to figure it out for yourself. But put information and value first, and the money will come naturally. So information and value come first, and the money will come naturally as a net result. Have you ever heard me say the money is a byproduct of what we do well?
Yeah.
It's exactly the same thing.
Well, that falls into the next law as well as Wolfson's Law, and that's what I was going to say because we spoke about this on Saturday, Jim, and you were talking about the actual value and what you give to people on an appointment, and whether, I mean, you go out to see people to sell their property, but you don't always advise them that selling their property is the right thing, and that is real value.
Of course it is. And then when I walk in the door, I tell them exactly what they should be doing, how they should be doing it, where they should get advice for this, where they could get support for that, where they could get this. So by the time I walked out there, I've basically given them a whole financial makeover in terms of where they are right now. And I'll give them the facts and I'll let them decide what they want to do next.
Mm-hmm.
But the information and the value comes first. So give, and at some point you'll get. That's what it's all about. A lot of people talk about that. So let's talk about American entrepreneur Wolfson. Once put forward a rule: put information and intelligence first, and the money will come rolling in. So what does it mean? Well, in Florence, USA, for example, 2 men named John and Harry began working with a vegetable trading company at the same time. This is a good analogy. 3 months later, John was promoted to team leader with his salary doubled, and Harry was still in the same position. Now, very dissatisfied, Harry questioned his boss, and his boss answered, well, Now our company is ready to order a batch of potatoes. Go and have a look. Harry hurried back half an hour later to report the potatoes were sold in the wholesale vegetable centre. The boss stopped him and called John over, and John said methodically, there are 3 potato sellers in the wholesale vegetable centre 20 kilometres away. 2 of them charge $0.9, in other words, 90 cents per kilo,
90 cents,
per half kilo, and the other charges 80 cents per half kilo. By comparison, I found the potatoes with 80 cents per half kilo were not only cheaper, but also better quality. So as a person knows who's in real-time dynamics of the market and holds information without going out to inquire, has won without competition. Basically, what did I say about property investment? Coming back to that.
Yeah.
I've worked out the answer before I've actually started the journey. So the begin with the end in mind probably comes into this. Begin with the end in mind, and as a natural result, it's only a case of time and actually, how quick you can put everything together before you actually get to the end result. So probably it's the information and the value must come first before you benefit from anything else. It's the farmer mentality as well. Look at the farmer. He plants the seed, he sows the seed, he nurtures the seed, or she, by the way. No being sexist and anything like that. Plants the seed, sows the seed, nurtures the seed, anything like that. Does everything possible, expects no return at this point in time, and as a natural result, once the harvest grows, boom, the money will flow naturally. That's the whole point. That is actually Gilbert's law. Biggest problem in the world, no one tells you how to do it. That's really what it comes down to.
I think it's you're totally right, because I think when you put that much effort and apply knowledge and learning and enthusiasm into something in the beginning, without really having to seek the financial gain or having that as your ultimate goal, the money and financial aspects and things will always naturally follow that.
Yeah. So I stand corrected. That's actually Lawson's law. So mistake there. That's Lawson's law. Gilbert's law. We'll come back to Gilbert's law in a minute. So Lawson's law is actually put the information first, and the money will come naturally as a result of what we're doing. And that's Lawson's law. So that's how it comes out. So it kind of comes in with the farming mentality. Going back to the biggest law, the one about Gilbert's law. No one actually tells you how to do it. So what do I mean by that? About no one tells you how to do it? Well, it really is down to a case you have to figure out yourself, and that's what I did in the beginning.
It is, yeah. And I think
so what did I do in the beginning? I knew nothing about buy-to-let. I knew nothing about property investment. I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I knew a guy that did. At that time, I knew a person that did, and it was Jim Steenson. So Jim had just developed a unit. He was actually starting to rent them because he couldn't sell them because it wasn't the great economic times of that, the boom market at that time.
Yeah.
So he decided to rent them instead. So when he started to rent, I then started to pick up on it as well, because it was all, intertwined with my way of thinking, where I was going. So then I started figuring things out for myself as I went. And this is what Gilbert's law is all about. So apologies if I got that mixed up. So Gilbert's law is all about figure it out as you go along. This is about, Barbara Corcoran talks about it, the real estate tycoon. She talks about this quite a lot. She's on the Shark Tank in America, which is equivalent to Dragon's Den. So she talks about this quite a lot. And the great analogy she talks about is, what is it? Is one... just do it. In other words, she talks about just jump out the window and learn to fly on the way down. And literally, that's all I do. I just jump out the window and learn to fly on the way down. That's sometimes how you have to do it. Fly how you go. Hence the reason why we're starting early today. Because it's like, I know I've got a critical path here I've got to lead. I've got 3 different things to do in terms of property launches this afternoon. I need to fit them all in. I can't do them before, so we'll have to get this done early. So we're doing this a bit earlier than usual for that very reason. So this is about figuring it out. If you learn Gilbert's law and about figuring out how to do it as you go along, that's the perfect example. And I'll come back again to the analogy that I say, just jump out the window, for God's sake, and learn to fly on the way down. And you'll figure it out, trust me. This is all about commitment. This is about, do you actually believe in yourself, and do you have the faith in yourself as well? If you have overall belief in yourself and you have faith and it'll come right for you, you're more or less guaranteed that's what's going to happen. And now, it might not be exactly how you want it to be. It might not be exactly how you want it to be in terms of the overall result, but you're going to find your natural path. Now, incidentally, this one, figure it out as you go along. This is what I talk about, quite a lot about. I don't actually know where I'm going exactly, but I know if I keep doing things like this, and if I keep doing other things, like speaking to people on podcasts about how they got their success and stuff like that, and local people, and stuff like that as well. I know at some point in time it'll lead me to something else, which I don't know about yet, because I'm a great believer in you don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I trust myself, the fact that, I probably don't know what I don't know, because everybody goes, oh, you must know everything. No. It's like, you don't know what you don't know, and you just have to have faith in yourself that you're going to be able to figure it out as you go along. And that takes a lot of confidence in yourself and your abilities.
I think as well, like you say, obviously the Gilbert's Law is no one's going to tell you how to do it. But I think if you've got the savvy and the understanding to speak and learn to the right people and do the right things and be consistent in that, then ultimately you'll get to where you want to go on your journey.
Yeah. Let me give you a good example of this, Richard, and you'll be involved in this. When we set our targets at the start of the year, and you went, there's no way I'm going to achieve that. And I went, yeah, I think we will. Don't worry about it. We'll get there. And then within 2 months, we'd hit them.
Yeah. That was actually amazing, because we said, and I'm like, oh, we're never going to do that. And I didn't really have much confidence. And it just
But I had complete and utter faith.
It just naturally happened because we were doing the right things. Well, I was doing the right things and my team was doing the right things to get to that
and
point.
Do you know how I had complete and utter faith? Because I was working towards that as well, so unconsciously. I was working towards that as well. What we're doing right here just now is working towards what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
For that reason. And that's why it comes down to laws of attraction. It's that you'll attract the people that are like-minded like you and want to have what you're offering. That's it.
Yeah.
I still talk about it, and I talked about it yesterday, and I talked about it to somebody else from a different agency. They introduce me to themselves at they're an artist as well, and says, oh, I'm from a rival. And it's like, well, you're not really from a rival at all. It's like when people say, oh, that's your competition. It's like, you're not my competition at all. It's like the only person that is my competition is me right now. The me I am right now, and how better can I be than the person I want to be later on? So that's the person I'm competing against, is me every single time, to be better at what I do and to hone and develop my skills even more. But interestingly enough, when they says you're the competition, and I was like, but you're no. And then we had a discussion, and we were going back and forward, and I was talking to her about how she wants to leave and everything like that, and she wants to do her own artist thing and everything. And I went, why are you not doing it then? Because I'll not be able to develop the income enough to do it. And it's like, you could do anything you want. You don't realize.
I know.
You could monetize, and I said to her, you could monetize this. You could, I could help you do this. But she didn't believe that I was able to help her. Strange, eh? And yet I had more belief. I had more belief for that person, for them, than they had for themselves. What does that say?
Will be like that.
But I've come across that over the years all the time.
Yeah.
I see more in other people than they see in themselves. But they can't stay the course because they never ever see that. And as much as I try to help them see it, it just sometimes, we know at some point in time, there's a price to pay for everything. If you want what you really want, if you put your goals up on that wall, I can get you these goals, but you're going to have to pay a price to do it.
Yeah.
And it's not my price that you've got to pay. It's your price to get the goals that you want. So how much do you really want them? How important are these goals to you? Or are they just like, no, I just put them up because I feel nice about it.
Pie in
And
the
they feel
sky.
nice and fuzzy about, oh, I could have that beautiful car and I could have that beautiful house and I could have all that. And it's like, these are all the things I want in this wonderful holiday I could have. I could have all these things. And it makes them feel nice about it, thinking about it. But they never want to think about the fact that if you actually don't do anything, you'll never ever achieve them.
You didn't actually do anything or sacrifice anything to actually get them, then you're not going to achieve them.
Well, you say sacrifice, I just say pay a price.
Yeah. Okay.
Because you're not sacrificing anything really. You're not taking a dagger out and slicing open a lamb and getting his guts out and going, I think based on the soothsayer, all the rest of that. And you're not doing that. But what you are doing is you're what I call is compromising, settling.
Yeah.
Settle. That's what people do. They just settle. They get to a certain point and think, well, that's enough for me. I don't want to pay a bigger price for what I really want.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think to myself, and everything that just goes through my mind, and I talk to everybody about this anyway. I just think to myself, if I'm lying on my deathbed, will I actually regret not doing this? And if the answer to that is yes, it's like we're doing it, come hell or high water. If the answer to that is no, it's like, well, no interested. And I'll only focus on the things that I'll regret. That's all I do now. The things that I'll regret is the biggest thing I focus on now. Whatever that is, no matter what it is. If I'll regret maybe helping, a charity be a bigger charity and bring in more income, then I will help them do that. And I will help them develop a strategy in order to do that as well. So that's the sort of thing. So figure it out yourself. The Gilbert's Law that's what it's all about. It's just like you'll figure it out. Just have trust that you'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think it comes down to having trust and confidence in yourself and belief in yourself to actually be able to figure things out and navigate through that, whatever the situation may be.
So final one. What's the final one then?
I'm laughing about the final one because I know what it is, obviously, because I looked and I kind of fall. I'm guilty of this. It's Falkland's Law, and it's when there's no need to make a decision, don't make a decision. And it's a bit of a troubling kind of habit to follow because you find yourself overthinking about every aspect of your life. And I'm quite bad at overthinking things and trying to be a perfectionist. And I think that's where this all falls into. And it's something that I do.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, I would say that. We've all fallen foul of that. The Falklands Law, when there's no need to make a decision, just don't make the decision. I tell you a classic example of that. When I think of how this will apply, when someone says to me there and then, when I'm looking at something, you can get it today for 20% less, but you need to buy it today. Now, I immediately think to myself, do I really need this? And if the answer to that is no, then the answer to the question is, I'm not interested. But you're getting 20% off. It's like, no, I'm not interested. If I do need it tomorrow or the next day, and I need, not want, if I need it, then I'll go and buy it again. But I bet you I'll probably get the 20% off again anyway.
I was just going to say, you'll probably get the 20% off later in the line anyway.
They've given me it already. They've given me the money off already. It's a classic trait of a salesman, a typical sales tactic. I mean, I've never done that sort of thing. That's pressured selling. And a lot of estate agents do that. I can give you a real good deal today. And it's like, no, they'll give you that deal any day. It's like, don't kid yourself. But people actually they don't fall for it, but they like to think they're getting a good deal. And that's all they like to think. So they go away feeling they've got a good deal because they've said they've got a good deal. But the reality is you would have got that deal tomorrow and you would have got that deal in 6 months' time. It would have been the same deal. It probably would have been better, by the way. Because the reason that they're trying to do the deal is they're trying to get you to commit so they can get income. And if they don't get that income, therefore, they're probably going to come back to you and say, we're going to need it. We're desperate for income. So they're probably going to even cut their throat more.
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably probably the classic example. If you really don't need to make that decision, just don't make the decision. You don't have to. You don't have to look at loads of things that I've looked in the past. Like, let's think about doing that. Let's think about doing this. Let's think about doing that. What would happen if we do this? What would happen if we do that? Have I actually done anything about these things? No, because I thought they're not particularly essential to what we do. They're not critical to what we do, and they're like, they're things that might add a bit of value, but they'll not add significant value, and they'll not make a difference to what we're doing right now. So there is no impending reason to implement them straight away, make a decision for the sake of it.
Yeah, I think it's important to always look at different things, and things continually change, and consider things, but it doesn't mean you always have to act upon them. And I think a good example, if we relate this back to property investment, and we've spoken about this a few times, is where people end up being so busy just for the sake of being busy, and they continually are making decisions about, like, say they buy a buy-to-let purchase, and it's like, oh, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this, and before you know it, they rip the whole place out and cost themselves an absolute fortune, because they've made all these decisions and done all these things that they didn't really need to do.
Look at a house seller. They make all these decisions and do all these things, and then you come round and you go, well, you didn't really need to do that.
Need to do that, yeah.
So you didn't need to do it.
Examples, yeah.
So what was the point? If you didn't need to do it, why did you need to do it? Why did you? Because they felt people sometimes, for the sake of it, people actually feel they're actually doing good because they're making decisions. But sometimes the best decision is not to make the decision.
Yeah.
And that's where Falkland's Law comes in. When there's no need to make that decision, just don't make the decision. And remember, the word is need. There's no need. Need is essential. Want is a desire.
Yeah.
So that brings us to the 5. I mean, there's one more law which you would have definitely heard of, and someone from a tech background, for example, and it's Moore's law. I mean, have you actually ever heard of Moore's law? I mean, I haven't really heard of it until I looked into it.
I haven't heard of Moore's law, no. But
so it comes from Gordon Moore, who was the founder of Intel, right? And it states that the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit doubles approximately every 2 years. In isolation, that seems quite dull, but its implications are hugely significant. Put very crudely, it means that the processing power is getting much better all the time, which drives the limits of our technological process, of our technological progress. So Moore's law is that, it's the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit doubles approximately every 2 years. In other words, well, look at, for example, I've got more power in my mobile phone. I've got more power in my mobile phone than the actual first
computer.
Than the first spaceship it landed on the moon.
Right, okay.
I've got more power in my mobile phone than the first spaceship actually landed on the moon.
God, that's crazy to think that.
Yeah, I know. But there's more technological power and processing power in my phone, in anybody's phone, and a smartphone now, than there was in the first moon landing. And it's because of the moon landing that all this progress was made, and then micro components and microcomputers and microchips. That's why they're called microchips, nanochips, nanotechnology. This means they go smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller till that's what he said. An integrated circuit, a dense integrated circuit, will double approximately every 2 years for that reason. Now, could we apply some sort of technology of Moore's law to house prices? And there's a small alignment with that. Now, when you look at house prices double every 15 to 20 years. And everybody goes, it will never continue to do that. Yes, it will. Because salaries will double as well, therefore. And then what happens is the banks will become more creative to keep themselves in business, and they'll provide better products. They'll provide longer terms of mortgages. They'll maybe provide lower interest rates because that's the way the demand is. Because remember, they have to keep selling loans. They can't sell loans to people that can't afford the loans. They're just and put it crudely, they're a loan shark. It's just that they're legitimized by the legislation and they follow certain rules. But in order for them to stay in business, they have to keep selling you loans. They have to keep selling something in order to keep building that. So when they take your money and they lend it out to 10 different people, but they've only got your money once, and the hope that that doesn't all come back in. So see how that multiplies every single time. So that's the only way the bank will keep in business, and that's the only way an economy will keep in business as well, and growing. So this is what he said, about the technological improvements. It'll double every single time. This is why economy has to grow as well, and this is why we said, the 3% rent. This is daft. This is daft. This is like the 3% rent that we wouldn't have otherwise applied, the increase every single year. If you apply it over the next 5 years and increase the rent by 3% every single year, you're actually getting an 18% increase in the rent over 5 years. That's more than what the government's complaining about just now.
I know.
And yet they're saying going to increase the rent 3% every single year. How stupid is that? Did they ever? They obviously never thought that through.
Yeah, you said, was it last week you sent this to me?
So I'm not going to tell them, and not very many people are going to watch the show anyway or listen to the show, especially at the end of it. So we're all going to keep buttoned about it.
Yeah.
Zip. Throw away the key. I'm not saying anything else about that.
I know, because you messaged me about this, and I thought, really? And I went away and worked out, and then I phoned you, remember? Yeah. And it's like, it's crazy. So
it's something like 24% over 10 years.
Yeah.
It's crazy, or maybe it's 34% over 10 years. It's like, wow. It's like, flipping heck, really? It's like, over 10 years, they're complaining right now it's going up so much. And yet over the next 10 years, by what they're saying in the model, it's like, that just defies logic. So the only way to sort that problem, we talked about in the beginning, limiting supply, is actually to define the problem in reality, and actually really, in Kydland's law, is define it, write down the matter clearly, and it's half solved. But you need to know what you're actually writing down and define the problem in itself. So that's it. That's it in a nutshell. To finish this off, the 5 most powerful laws in the world, with the one extra added, is Murphy's Law, Kydland's Law, Gilbert's Law, Wolfson's Law. You've got Falkland's Law, and then finally you've got Moore's Law. And that's the five most powerful laws in the world. And most people will follow one of them or maybe 2 of them, but the really successful people will follow all of them. I'll guarantee you.
I'm quite confident that a lot of people watching will probably, myself, last week when we decided we were going to talk about this week, I'd never heard of any of them. But when you actually look at what they actually are, you do actually implement them in certain points in your life. So hopefully it's been useful to everybody. We did change the times a wee bit this week, and sorry if I've mucked up some people's Monday. Gary says, sabotaging my Monday time block.
There you go. Gary's come up with Sod's Law.
And
exactly. Yeah, and Sod's Law is, it happens, you just deal with it.
Yeah.
And that's the best way forward. Kind of aligning with the one that we just spoke about, which was Gilbert's Law. It was like, you just have to think on your feet and deal with it at the time. And Gary, you'll be probably extremely successful because of that, if you follow that mantra. Okay.
Right, Jim, thanks for that. That was great. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll leave it there. Until next week.
Bye-bye for now, folks.
Thanks.